So the reality is when a dispute happens, the cardholder's bank makes the call, right? So it's their customer that they're going to be ruling on. So it's a conflict of interest, right? They're not going to rule in your favor most of the time. At best, you have a 45% chance of winning. It's less than a coin flip.
Hey everyone, welcome to Reanimated Stories. I am your host, Roger of Reanimation Design, and today I have Trey Rush of PayTech Plus. Oh, hey, they kind of rhyme there. Trey, I have met through networking, and I was actually able to meet him in person a couple of months ago in Fort Worth, so that was absolutely fantastic. Trey, thank you so much for joining me today.
Roger, thank you so much for having me, man. I'm really excited.
Well, Trey, I don't want to take too much away from you. So can you please just let everyone know what is it that Trey does with PayTech Plus? Oh, no, hold on a second, because I wanted to rhyme that. Trey Rush with PayTech Plus.
Yeah, so I'm gonna have to start using that. That was not by design. I would love to take credit, but and say that was my idea, but it absolutely I did not realize or had it say that way. So no, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I mean, the short of it, and I've been trying very hard to really simplify every bit of my messaging with my business because simple scales and complex fails, right? So I'm
Right.
I'm a payments broker. So I do payment systems on easy mode. That's the short version. So I work with service-based businesses to get as an agency. So that's one thing that's different, which we can get into later, is it's an agency model. So for businesses that like a human being to talk to and have someone represent them and understand what they're doing in payments, because getting paid in business is kind of important, that,
Mhm.
that they want to work with somebody on a one-on-one basis. I'm your guy.
That's awesome. All right. So you got to give us your tagline though, because I love that. What's your tagline whenever you finish off?
When you got to get paid with Trey.
I always find that. I wish my name had something cool where I could do something like that, but I can't think of anything that has to do with reanimation design and Roger. So although maybe I have, and maybe there is something there, right? Like Trey Rush, Paytech Plus, and I just haven't said it because we're so close to it, right? We're so close. All right, Trey. So let's go ahead and let's just get right into the meat of it. Why should somebody go with Paytech Plus or an agency like yourself? Well, actually, no. You know what? Let's back up first. Let's because I want to touch on that point because I think that's important. We'll table that for just a second. So you have to keep listening. No. So what is the difference between Paytech Plus as an agency versus just someone who does payment processing or just payment processing in general?
Great question. So the majority payment facilitators, and I'll use that as a general term, is going to fall into one of three categories. And I don't know the exact statistics, but for anecdotal and for general purposes, we'll say half of them are PayFacs, which are like your Faceless, just your put in the algorithm, your Stripe, your Square, your QuickBooks, where they know nothing about you, and the algorithm makes decisions about how they're going to process your payments. Then you have legacy processors, which was everything before those guys came on board, which is like your Chase, your WorldPay, like just your legacy normal, like who you would sign up through your bank. And then you have probably 10% is agencies, which is they use the legacy rails, the legacy processors, but they're the ones servicing the account. So the problem that by and large in the payments industry, there's a lot of things to consider, but if you talk to a lot of business owners, most of the time service is going to be one of the pain points for sure. The payments industry is not known for having great service at all, or let alone advocating for their clients. So that's kind of the opposite spectrum that I really wanted to attack when I started my business.
Yeah, it's one of those things like, I mean, you talk to your bank and it's like, all right, well, they need the payment today. And then it's, you know what, you messed up or something like that. And I need a refund. And they're like, all right, well, we'll give it to you within 5 to 10 business days. And it's like, what? And I know that there's more to it than that, but you know what I'm saying? So that's really cool that you do that because I think that that's super important. So you mentioned it in there and you said you called them like Stripe and all them like PayFacs, right? Is that what you
Yeah.
said? Like
Yeah.
FAX?
It's
Oh, okay.
it's kind of like a slang term, payment facilitator, so
Oh, okay.
it's like a short version. It's lingo.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, no, no, no. I was just thinking because you're saying that they were faceless and then algorithm, and I was like, oh well, if you do like pay fax, like pay faceless, algorithmic, we'll come back to what X could
Yeah.
stand for, Xenobots or something like that. But anyway, okay. So now back to my other question that I wanted to ask. Okay, so you talked about those. You talked about the faceless, the pay fax. So what are some of the so well, I guess we'll start with this question and you just kind of take it from there. Why are they so popular and what are the things that people need to think about when they do those faceless algorithmic xenobots?
Gotcha. So they've done a lot of things really well. And in a lot of ways, they're actually victims of their own success. So the pain point with back in the day, the legacy providers, your normal pay or legacy payment processors is we already covered their service is bad. The onboarding process was kind of painful. Like, you had to submit an application and, it could take a week to get approved, and it still does in some circumstances, depending on what kind of business, what kind of vertical. There's a lot of things to consider. But the onboarding process was kind of painful and it didn't integrate with anything. So what Square was the first, then Stripe, and what they did was they made it very easy. Like, hey, go online, tell us a little bit about your business, and then within, minutes or an hour, you have an account. The problem with that is they haven't underwritten you at all. So you think you're good to go, but what happens is that the algorithm starts underwriting you right then and there. Like, they don't know that if they want to keep you on their platform permanently. So what happens is, or is the analogy that I like to use is they invite everyone on the cruise ship, everyone's welcome, right? And then when it gets a mile or two off a port and they kick the ones off that they don't want and keep everybody else, and hopefully you have a life raft. So that's the problem. And a lot of people don't realize that's how it works. Just because you're approved right away is not a permanent approval. They're one of the problems that they have is purging a lot of businesses from their networks that they really do, that the algorithm considers a high risk that you would may not
Okay.
you may not think they would be.
Yeah. And and so let's say going off of that scenario, if you are one of those high risks, so let's say that you started your business on Monday, right? And then let's say on Tuesday you started, or I mean, I'm sorry, you didn't start your business on Monday, but you started using Stripe or one of those places, right? I'm just picking on Stripe because everybody knows them. You you got signed up on them on Monday, you got some clients Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday, and they were paying you and then on Friday, they were like, "Well, you're too high risk," and so they kick you out. So what happens to the money that's in that's in their platform if you haven't already like taken it out of there? What happens to that?
So it would go into a reserve account. And so at that point, you have two options. Option A, which is the one everyone takes, is you can just refund the payment and hope your customer pays you a different way. Option B is that money will be held for 6 months, which is the
Oh,
entirety to cover all possible ways that a payment dispute could happen. It's like a statute of limitations. That's a legal term. It's not exactly the same, but it's past that time frame where you could possibly dispute that transaction. So their risk falls off at that point. And so then legally they have to cut you a check for that.
wow. So you could get like 10, 15. I mean, you can get like a lot of money in that account and you don't take it out by Friday. And all of a sudden they're like, nope, sorry, you're high risk. And they shut it down and it's just sitting there and you can't get it out. Wow. That is absolutely so. Well, I guess if you do cancel it, do they just let it go? If you refund that transaction, they just let it go, and then you just have to find another payment processor or
Correct.
something at that point.
Mhm.
Oh, wow, geez, that is crazy. So speaking of high risk, what? And you said that you may not always, and I'm not expecting you to give me a comprehensive list, but like, what are some industries that are like, okay, yeah, that makes sense that they're high risk that they normally won't take, and what are some that you don't think that are high risk that actually are high risk?
So high risk, you would think right away would be your cannabis is like a big up and coming industry. That's even like they've come up with a term called super high risk now, where I guess that would fall into. I mean, just your outliers, your travel clubs, your like I don't know, fortune teller. I mean, you could get in some weird industries. You know what I mean? Anything that's not mainstream like that, especially if it's
Yeah.
like a very subjective result, those would all be
Mm,
considered high risk, like debt collectors, adult industry, things like that. Those would all be considered high risk industries.
okay. Okay. And can you explain a little bit more of high risk, like what that kind of means a little bit more?
I will try to keep this as short and concise as I possibly can. So basically, when it comes to risk, the processor cares about two things. How likely is a dispute to happen? And then from there's where it gets complicated. So how likely is a dispute to happen? And more importantly, if one happens, how likely is the business able to cover it? Because if I dispute a transaction with a business and I as the customer win the dispute, as I most likely will, we'll get into that later as well. And the business doesn't have the money to cover that dispute, the processor's stuck paying it. They have to financially cover all transactions that they process. So that's where their exposure is.
Oh, so they're saying that if you're okay, so yeah, if you're processing a lot and you have a lot of disputes coming back, they're probably or I guess are they traditionally picking those up from other industry or I mean from other businesses in that industry and kind of historically seeing, okay, this has a lot of okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yep.
That's crazy. So obviously you named a few cannabis adult industry and fortune telling, all the, kind of outliers and all that. What are some kind of, I guess, mainstream or typical businesses that you see that people are like, "Oh, hey, I'm in that business," and it's like, "Oh, well, you're actually pretty high risk, or you're high risk," or
Yeah. One of them that's crazy that I never thought, and I learned this one years ago, is furniture stores. Believe it or not, furniture stores are very high risk. Who'd
oh,
have thought?
weird.
But apparently,
Yeah.
because a lot of them do like down payments and payment plans and things like that, and it's not like it's very hard to go repo furniture, I guess. But yeah, apparently furniture stores, and I don't have any in my portfolio, but apparently they're very high risk. Yeah, I know. But
That is weird. Yeah.
that's a weird one. They have problems like
Yeah.
other like towing companies, right? They get a lot of people that they get a lot of disputes because like towing companies, for example, you think, oh, if I get stranded on the road, I call a tow truck. But there's also a lot of them that, if you get arrested and you get a DUI, the cops have to come tow your stuff. You still have to pay to get it out. A lot of those get disputed. So
Okay.
those would be two industries that you may not think of. But
Yeah.
recently, there's been a major shift where like a lot of online professional services that you would think consider low risk, mostly your marketing firms are really getting hammered. Coaches, consultants, anything that's like I offer a large ticket service and it's kind of a subjective result. If I'm selling a course, you might think it's awesome. This guy might think it's not good. And so that increases the likelihood of a dispute, and so those become higher risk. Anything where you can't guarantee a specific result is going to be a higher risk.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. Okay, yeah, yeah. So like yeah. So pretty much it's like, okay, well, we're saying that you can do this, but like it's not a guarantee that you're like, oh, you can do this and sign 6 clients in 6 days. But it's like, well, it's not
Credit
really a guarantee.
repairs.
It's yeah, okay, yeah, yeah, okay. Interesting. That's interesting. Okay. So I guess if someone is thinking about that and they're like, well, I don't know if I'm high risk, what are some of the things that they need to think of? I mean, obviously, okay, so historically, is there, a way, obviously subjective, but what are some things that they need to think about in order to say, like, maybe I am high risk, or maybe I'm not sure I'm high risk?
Well, I actually have a very specific way that you can find out, which we can come back to. But I mean, I've called it like your risk profile, which is it goes
Mm,
into like how likely is a dispute to happen. And so how high are your ticket sizes? An $8 cup of coffee, if it's bad, I mean, who cares? I'm just not gonna go back to that coffee shop, right? But if it's an $8,000
yeah,
transaction and it's the work's not perfect, there's going to be ramifications on that. So the ticket
yeah,
size, how high is your ticket size compared to your revenue? So like that ratio. So let's say you're doing, 20 grand a month in transactions and you run a $10,000 charge. That's half of your revenue. That's high risk. What percentage of your customers are new versus repeat is one that no one thinks about. right? If all your customers
Oh,
are repeat customers, that's pretty solid. It's unlikely you have an issue. Whereas if most of your customers are new and they're strangers, you don't have a business relationship, much likely that someone's just going to dispute it to be, you know, shady, which happens a lot now.
yeah. Yeah. Actually, it's interesting that you say that. Recently there has been, it's obviously work in marketing and all that sort of stuff. So obviously Google business profile, you can get reviews and all that. But there has been a plethora, I like to use that word plethora. There has been a gigantic, like a scam almost, like where people will give you a negative review only to say like, "Hey, if you want this," and you'll be like, "I don't even recognize this person," right? And then you'll reach out to them and say, "Hey, I'm sorry, blah blah blah." Talk only for them to be like, "If you want, I'll take back that review, but you got to give me 500, 1,000. You got to give me so much amount of money or something like that." Do you see that happen quite often, or do you see that happen with some of the high risk? And does that then I guess my question is, what if that does happen to you and you're on that platform and it's obvious that it is, you're like, I don't, you're saying that I was going to help you lose weight. Like, first off, I was going to, I'm helping you create a course or something, like that, like these two things don't make sense and all that. What do people do have you seen that? And what do people do about that?
So you mean like if they're just getting a dispute that is
Yeah,
blatantly
that's so
fraudulent?
just, yes, 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 100%.
So there's two kinds of dispute fraud, right? So there's actual fraud, which means someone got their credit card number, hacked or stolen, and you see this a lot in like brick and mortars. But what'll happen is, or e-commerce gets a lot of this, where, I steal someone's credit card information and I go shopping with it. Well, unless you verify as the business, if you don't verify, which an e-commerce, how could you? There's no way to do that. But if you don't verify that the cardholder is the person making the transaction and that transaction is disputed, you lose. Like there's no comeback. I don't know. I'll give you a prime example because I have just when I started my business, I got a lot of auto shops. I still have a lot of auto shops. I mean, for brick and mortar. I'm mostly online now, but I used to when I did a lot of brick and mortar, it was mostly auto shops, repair, transmission, whatever. But what a very common scam there is, someone will call and say, "Hey, I want to order 4 tires and I'm going to come pick them up." So already that's weird that you're going to buy 4 tires and not have them put on at the shop that you bought them from. So that's like your first red flag. This works all the time for them. They will call, order the tires, pay for them. Someone will come pick up the tires, and lo and behold, it's a stolen credit card. So it gets disputed. And so they just lose their inventory. It's just gone.
Yeah.
So that's
Wow, that
one. But
sucks.
yeah, I've never heard of the Google review scam, and that was a new one.
Yeah, no, it's just, yeah, it's kind of starting to be a problem and all that, but they're trying to figure stuff out. But that's a whole nother discussion.
Right.
Yeah, no, that's crazy. So concerning being an agency and all that, what sets that apart for you for PayTech Plus versus someone like Stripe, and what do people need to kind of think about when they're if they're like, well, I'm on Stripe, right? But I don't know if I'm high risk. How do I find out that I'm high risk? And how can I talk to somebody like yourself?
So it would be a completely different scenario with something like Stripe versus like what's a good way to put this? With Stripe, it's good for certain businesses that have like maybe very low ticket sizes, but with my agency, I work with businesses that need consultation, right? So it's a consultative approach. So, for example, having a refund policy. I talk to a lot of businesses that don't have an actual refund policy. If you're familiar with contracts, you usually have a process in there if you get sued. You've probably seen that where it's like, okay, I get a certain amount of time to cure the issue. You got to notify me in writing within a certain amount of time. And I have a certain amount of time to fix the problem. And then if you do sue me, we got to go to arbitration first or mediation first. And then if that doesn't work, then you can sue me, but you have to sue me in my state and not yours. There's just a lot of stuff that you agree to, right? Well, you can do the same thing with refunds. It's not going to hold up legally, but it gives you more ground to stand on when that dispute happens,
Mm.
you could say, hey, I have a process here. The customer signed off that they understand and they didn't follow it. So you could say, hey, if there's a problem, you got to let me know in writing, X amount of time, give me a certain amount of time to fix it. And then, from there, do what you got to do.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah, no, I think that's really good advice because yeah, I don't know. I think when I first started, I didn't have like a refund policy, and honestly, like looking back at my contract, actually, I was blessed to have a client who actually had their spouse look at it, and their spouse was like, "Hey, there's a couple things in here that you should probably look at because one, it doesn't make sense, and two, it actually kind of hurts both parties, and you need to kind of think about." And so I was like, "Oh," and I looked over it, and so they actually kind of reviewed a little bit for me, and they were like, obviously, you have to get like, true legal advice, but they were like, you just need to think through this because they had worked in that sort of industry. And yeah, I think that that's super important. So you had mentioned earlier that there's a way if that people can figure out if they're high risk or not. Talk a little bit more about that.
So this has been one of the major problems that I've had for years, which is by the time I get to a client, usually we're already neck deep into a problem. And I'll give you a
Yeah.
prime example of that. So there's a contractor. They're not like a general contractor, but it was an HVAC company. They did a job. It was like $9,000, $9,500 for this job. They finished it on a Monday. Homeowners were all smiles. Everything was great. And, on Wednesday morning, they wake up to their business account being negative like $1,500. So they're like, wait a minute, what is going on? They call the bank. It turns out the customer disputed the transaction. They still don't know why, but they did, right? And
Yeah.
so at that point, they're like, well, wait a minute, we have payroll on Friday. Like, how are we going to make payroll? So they had to take out a high interest loan just to make payroll, right? So the reality is when a dispute happens, and this is kind of like the underlying message that I want everyone to know, that I want business owners to understand. The cardholder's bank makes the call, right? So it's their customer that they're going to be ruling on. So it's a conflict of interest, right? They're not going to rule in your favor most of the time. At best, you have a 45% chance of winning. It's less than a coin flip. And it actually goes down from there. But they're going to rule in favor of their customer more often than not. And so, got to really keep that in mind. A lot of people, when they go with processors, it's all about the rate. It's all about the rate. Well, it's also about the risk. They don't think about the risk. They only think about the rate. Okay. And so depending on the business, the risk is actually more important a lot of times. But in this scenario, that transaction's gone, they're negative $1,500. And so they, of course, appeal that, but that could take 30 days, right? So best case scenario, you actually win, right? You actually win. You've still been without your capital for 30 to 60 days while this is getting sorted out. So that's the risk when you take card payments. So my my recommendation is, depending on the type of business that you're in and where that risk factor is, that you implement pricing strategies to where the customer is paying additionally for those card fees to offset the risk that comes with it. So to kind of tie all that together, when I got in contact with that client, that dispute has already happened, right? So they didn't have these pricing strategies in place. Like, we're fine moving forward, we can fix it, but you can't really go back. So
Yeah.
I came up with a self audit quiz that a merchant could take. They answer 15, 16 questions, and it educates them as they're answering the question. So they answer the question and it tells them why this question is important, which is a recent revision. And so it really highlights a lot of areas that they may not realize that they need to pay attention to, such as like having that refund policy in place. And, do they take a copy of an ID, with transactions over a certain amount? A lot of people don't do that, and they should.
Oh,
That gives you,
yeah.
that gives you like to stand on when disputes happen. So I have a domain redirected to it, which is freemerchantscore.com. So if someone goes to freemerchantscore.com, it'll give them like a brief description on kind of like what their risks are, some stats, things like that. And they can go on there and answer those questions and get a real result on kind of where their risk factor is and what percentage of risk that they would be at.
I appreciate you doing that, and obviously I've taken it and see where my risk is at. But I would definitely encourage anybody who's listening, check the show notes. I'm definitely going to have that there in the description. So definitely check out the show notes, especially if you take, I mean, yeah, it doesn't matter if you take an $8 cup of coffee or an 8,000 transaction, definitely check that out. So Trey, that would definitely be a way that people can start to kind of start that conversation with you to figure out, okay, well, am I at risk? Where can they find you aside from, what was it? Freemerchantscore.com.
Remerchantscore.com. So if you actually,
Awesome.
I recommend if you take cards, I recommend everyone take it, right? Because
Yeah.
my main focus with that was if you take the quiz that you get educated in 3 to 5 minutes, because let's face it, payments, although it's critically important for the business, it's not something that business owners focus on every day, right? So it had to be something
Yeah.
very quick, something very low friction, and it's not going to take a lot of time. So you could take five, maybe at the 5 minutes out of your day and learn a lot and get a lot from it. So I do recommend everyone that takes cards go through that. But at the end of the quiz, it gives them an opportunity to book a call with me.
Yeah. Perfect. I think that's fantastic. I mean, I would highly recommend, like Trey was saying, if you take cards, definitely make sure. I have heard I'm in a web design group, and this was a while ago, but they were talking about a story of someone that they had a business and it was like a fraud. It was very obviously a fraud. They had to get like lawyers involved, but they had like a significant amount of money. And it was like, we can't be 60 days without this money. And all of a sudden, and it was even worse because it was like on the far end, right? It was like not only is Stripe saying that, hey, they're disputing this transaction, but we've actually found that you're the one that's causing the fraud and we're going to now hold your money. And not only that, but now you're going to have to owe money back to us. And it was a whole thing. And then they got the lawyer involved and it was this whole thing. But yeah, it was crazy because they were like, wait, how are we doing the fraud? And someone had gotten a hold of their like API or something like that and like had done all of this stuff, but then had also had other people like charge things to them. It was a whole thing, right? And we don't think about that, right? And like you said earlier, the thing is that they didn't have it, they couldn't really get to talk to anybody at Stripe, right? Like they were being tossed around through chatbots and through, machines and all this sort of stuff. And emails, and it's like, no, we need to talk to somebody, like we need to talk to a human being about that. And so I think that that's something that's missing from them that they're obviously going to get, from you. So Trey, is there any last bit of advice or any last thing that you wanted to say to our audience before we're finished up here?
Well, I mean, I guess I would just reiterate kind of like the three areas that our agency really focuses on, which is, the dispute risk, where, because what I find is, especially where the sandbox that I like to play in, which is, like I said, larger tickets, a lot of invoicing. So a lot of B2B, it falls in there. So a lot of commercial, suppliers, distributors. I mean, that could also fall into like CPAs, bookkeepers, things like that. But I mean, really anyone that's heavily B2B, what I've found is that there's an AR, like an accounts receivable component to this as well. So they're getting squeezed from disputes. They're getting squeezed from their fees. And I'm almost kind of embarrassed to say that I even really didn't understand the impact until fairly recently, because I'm thinking I'm going to save them 3% of their revenue, right? Because most of my clients that I work with, we put them on a pass-through program and I'm saving them 3% of the revenue. I'm like, that's great. It's a good amount of money, but I'm not going to make anyone rich or retire early. But when I dug into the profit margins, I mean, like a healthy profit margin, a very healthy, is 30%. Well, if you consider the 3% of the revenue versus the 30% profit margin, that's actually 10% of their profits that are going out the door just to process payments, just to have access to your money that you've earned, right? And so
Yeah.
it's a crazy paradigm where our banking industry has convinced the small business world that you should take all the risk and take all the expense while your customer gets all the perks and all the protection and pay nothing. It doesn't make
Yeah.
sense. You know what I mean? It absolutely doesn't make sense. So the next part of that is the AR component, where half found this out fairly recently. Half of all invoices in the country, B2B right now, are past due. Half.
Wow.
10% just get written off as bad debt, which is insane to me. So what's happening is these businesses are purposely paying these invoices late so they can pay more important creditors or suppliers or whatever. Meanwhile, you've done work for them and now you're kind of becoming their bank because they're delaying paying you, and it's causing massive cash flow issues, right? So they take 21 plus days to get paid past when the invoice was due, but a lot of these businesses only have like a month's worth of cash reserves. So it causes a lot of problems. And, that's something that my invoicing platform kind of helps deal with as well.
That's fantastic. I appreciate that. We're going to put all of your the description in the description. We're going to put all your links where they can get in contact with you so that they can start getting those invoices paid and start getting, would you say 10% back of their income? That's pretty fantastic. So
Yeah.
awesome. Well, it's great. I really appreciate you coming out today, and I appreciate your talk and letting us know. It may not be a comfortable conversation, but it's a conversation that, people need to hear, especially business owners need to hear, so that they're not 30, 60, 6 months 6 months without any revenue. So I appreciate you coming out, Trey.
Thanks, Roger. I really appreciate having me.